Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our virtual summit panel discussion today as part of our digital experience. The summit, hosted by Payments Canada for over 20 years now, is a place to engage on exciting ideas and connect with some of the best leaders and innovators from across the payments ecosystem to share knowledge. My name is Becky Drummond. I am the Director of Operational Resiliency at Payments Canada, and I am fortunate enough to be hosting and moderating today's panel discussion with some of our senior risk leaders in this space on an important topic: transparency as a trust builder in an era of uncertainty. Today, organizational leaders are faced with the challenge of inspiring trust with stakeholders fostered through transparency. We know that in today's world, transparency is table stakes for an effective risk management program, and trust is no longer just about compliance. It's really about delivering consistency with clarity and sufficient context for our stakeholders, particularly when it comes to operating critical payment systems and facilitating payments for Canadians. So today we'll be exploring how senior risk leaders approach building trust and demonstrate resilience as they navigate the risks and opportunities driven by many things such as technology, regulatory, political, and social pressures that we currently face in our current payments ecosystem. So with me today, I have three exceptional risk leaders in this space: Adeline Cheng from EY, Peter Dodick from Payments Canada, and Mario Falvo from Interac. So before we get started, why don't we start with a round of introductions? Adeline, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. My name is Adeline Cheng. I'm a partner in the EY Toronto office. I am also the regulatory and resilience leader in Canada, and I'm also part of the EY Global Regulatory Leadership Team. I have also served our clients in a number of capacities, including supporting them through crisis response in financial services and acting as their crisis advisor during disruption.
Thanks, Adeline. Peter?
Hey, Becky, thanks for having me. My name is Peter Dodick. I'm the Chief Risk Officer here at Payments Canada. I've been with the firm for 7 years, and I lead the compliance, audit, risk, and legal functions. Before my time here at Payments Canada, I worked for 15 years at the Bank of Montreal in finance and strategy, corporate development, and in risk. And in a former life, I was an engineer in the resource sector.
Awesome, thank you. And Mario, last but not least.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. I'm Mario Falvo, the Chief Financial and Risk Officer for Interac Corp. My portfolio here at Interac includes our finance, vendor management, and risk management functions. And I'm also responsible for managing the ongoing requirements of our prominent payment system designation with the Bank of Canada. For those of you that don't know who we are, Interac operates the Interac e-transfer service, along with other payment systems such as debit and automated banking machine infrastructures. We also offer verification solutions within the public and private sectors through our subsidiary 2Keys and the acquisition of rights to the Secure Key digital ID services for Canada. Prior to joining Interac, I spent nearly 16 years at Meridian Credit Union in various roles, including finance, risk, AML compliance, fraud management, regulatory compliance, and internal audit. Very happy to be here today and have the opportunity to build upon our panel of last year and discuss this very important topic of transparency as a trust builder with my respected peers.
Thanks, Mario. And thank you, everybody, for the great introductions. So to get started, I just wanted to level set on each of your perspectives and definitions of trust. When we think back, even just over the last 5 years, there has been a number of changes across the ecosystem. I think 5 years ago, we were all locked up at home, not sure when the world was going to continue or what it was looking like. Fast forward a few years from there, we were navigating through navigating back to post-pandemic, post-normal, what does that look like? And now we're challenged with escalating geopolitical tensions, economic volatility, and just layer on top of that, heightened threat landscape driven by technology transformation and advancements when we think about things like fraud and cybercrime. So definitely not an easy job to manage risk in today's age. Definitely kudos to all of you for being in these positions. I wanted to start with just elaborating, or how you can elaborate on your organization's definition of trust and how it's evolved over the last few years, given everything that's going on in the world. And maybe if you can just touch on some of the biggest trust gaps or challenges that you're facing in each of your organizations. So Peter, why don't we start it off with you?
Thanks, Becky. So that's a big question, but something I think about, I think quite a bit. I'll try to answer that trust question from my perspective. That Payments Canada, a member association where we operate rails and make rules. So maybe I'll start with the evolution of trust through our development of the real-time rail as a bit of a recent example of to show how trust works across an industry. So as I was at the Payments Canada Summit last year, and where I saw on the main stage IBM, I saw CGI, I saw Interac, and I saw Payments Canada, where senior leadership committed to a Team Canada approach to large-scale project delivery. And my sense is that Team Canada approach has trust and transparency at its core. And my take is that approach of Team Canada was built from a sense of collective responsibility and collective results. I think, in other words, as you build trust, you all have skin in the game. With respect to my role as an individual, as a CRO, I think about trust and the ability of parties to share information with me, to share risk insights, to escalate when necessary, whether that's internal within the firm or external. Of course, building and operating those rails takes many partners with different capabilities. And I think the foundation of those relationships that we have with others is trust, right? Trust is critical as we enter into multi-year agreements with third parties. I think transparency and trust is not only key from a risk management perspective, but I'm sure it's also key to my friends in the first line. If I was to zoom out a little bit and think about trust in a bit of a broader fashion, I think we must consider things that bring trust to our ecosystem, right? I'm thinking about our key areas of focus for this year and future years. I think of issues that are critical to Payments Canada, and I'm sure my colleagues here on the panel. Things like centralized fraud management bring trust to our environment. I think maintaining strong cybersecurity brings trust. I think about our data management posture. And of course, things like geopolitical awareness, I think brings trust. So I think at the core of connecting all those dots and building a broader network is trust. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Peter. Those are really good points. Adeline, do you have anything to add, especially around, that third party lens as well, when we think about developing trust and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, we've been through a lot over the last 5 years. And I think if there's any lessons that we've learned as risk professionals is that disruptions can happen and they're not tidy. We don't live in a world where things are, neatly square in a box. And, when I was looking at operational risk scenarios back in the day, we would think about a pandemic and we would think about people being away or unable to work, like in big swaths. But we didn't think about how, COVID had put us in a situation where we were in this sort of permafrost, work from home, still engaging, but in a totally different environment. And then you layer on top of that supply chain pressures, inflationary pressures, increased cyber attacks, and so forth. And these are issues that modern organizations and modern CROs have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So the problems that we face are not clean and tidy. And so I think part of being able to build that trust is also being prepared, recognizing that the world is a very complex place, the risks are fast evolving, and that there are people who are not just thinking about how the risks were managed in the past, but thinking about how the risks are going to continue to evolve in the future. And so when we think about how the risks are going to evolve in the future, that also considers, I think, how we do business, and that increases our reliance on third parties, on technologies, and so forth. And so making sure that those programs are as robust as they can, and that we're holding third-party providers as accountable as possible to show us how they're managing their own risks, so that if there's disruptions in their supply chain or their ability to provide those products and services, that we are also able to respond and make appropriate arrangements and so forth. So I think having that level of preparedness and recognizing, as the best plans that you may have may be disrupted, and that if you don't have a plan for the fact that disruption could happen, then it starts to fall apart. So I think preparedness and trust go hand in hand.
And those are really good points. And I think, just to dovetail or tie those together, Mario, what are your perspectives, coming from being a third party to this Team Canada approach and being a service provider? How can you maybe speak to how that definition of trust and some of the key challenges or focus areas are from an Interact perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. So I'd say Interact's always had a relentless focus on availability and resiliency, similar to Payments Canada, where yourself and Pete work. We really understand how critical our services are to Canadians and the importance of them being both available and secure. I'd say that one of the most significant ways in which our definition of trust has evolved recently is through a greater focus on fraud. So Pete mentioned this. We say made in Canada for Canada sums up our business model and our history as a Canadian leader in digital transactions since 1984. We are very proud that we were recently recognized as the most reputable, or one of the most reputable financial services brand in Canada by Leger. So amid the challenges, and Adeline spoke to them, we have very turbulent geopolitical and economic environment right now, marked by rising tariff threats and the rapid evolution of AI. The need for Canadians to rely on established and dependable brands has never been more important. And in a world that's defined by rapid technological change, including the emergence of AI, security and fraud prevention has become even more critical. With that focus we've always had on resiliency and security, that's never going to go away. But we're really looking at fraud prevention, and on that specifically, taking that further step for the Canadian financial services ecosystem as we evolve our definition of trust. And when we developed our corporate strategy for 2025 to 2027, one of the 3 new areas that we included in that strategy was the establishment of a fraud services line of business. We're focused here because fraud is a systemic pain point for the Canadian financial ecosystem, and supporting the financial institutions who are our partners in combating fraud can improve customer experience and gain trust. Our commitment's twofold: to protect every transaction and to ensure that the Canadian economy modernizes at pace with these advancements. So we're investing very heavily in next generation fraud detection, developing real-time account-to-account payments, including for the real-time rail that we're working in partnership with Payments Canada on, and strengthening the next generation verification services in Canada. So these initiatives will guarantee that every transaction is secure and every customer remains protected, which underpins our promise of trust in that increasingly digital landscape.
And that's really great. And I really appreciate you speaking to the fraud component, because I don't think that it's a Canadian specific issue. We've seen, jurisdictionally everywhere, it's an issue and something that continues to rise and continues to create, distrust in the payments ecosystem, and how we combat that, especially given the rise of fraud, rise of cybercrime. We really have to take a look and take a step back and say, what are we doing in Canada, but also how do we build trust more at that global scale? So Mario, maybe you can start, talking a little bit about how, when we think about payments ecosystems globalizing and regulations being sort of different depending on what jurisdiction you're in, some are lagging, some are, very much diverging. How does your organization play a role in maintaining consistent standards for trust and transparency when you think about the global footprint from a regulatory or partner and service provider perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about interactions with our regulators. So both the organization that I work for as well as yours are regulated by the Bank of Canada. And one of the main tenets of their oversight is come early, come often. So that's particularly important when it relates to changes that we're looking to make, which require their involvement, or issues that we're navigating that they need to be aware of. So what this looks like in practice is early discussions with our oversight team to enable awareness, to clarify expectations, get an initial view of key areas of interest or focus, all towards that understanding of the risk that's present in the proposed changes, and then how we plan, most importantly, to mitigate them. A great example of this that we saw over the last year was when we were undertaking a review of our e-transfer pricing. As we worked through this initiative, we shared our end-to-end plan with the Bank of Canada. We socialized the various changes that we were considering and expected impacts from a customer perspective. So that really allowed us the opportunity to receive early feedback from the bank and information that they would be looking for when we ultimately shared the formal change with them for review and approval. Ultimately, the benefit of this come early, come often approach is no surprises, and that goes for either side. And then thinking about how we what can we do to navigate regulatory uncertainty while maintaining sort of a coherent, transparent strategy. I guess where I would go on that is doing this through industry collaboration groups. So, both my organization as well as Payments Canada are very fortunate to be a member of two groups like this on behalf of the payments ecosystem. The first is a global group of financial market infrastructures that meet about twice a year. The FMI Forum, as it's called, that we participate in, is a private sector initiative that proactively is there to improve the resilience of FMI. So we share and we develop best practices. We seek to address common concerns. We promote an integrated and comprehensive view of risks that we face. We're also expected to promote the common good and the regulatory goals of increasing resilience and avoiding mismanagement of risks that could weaken the centralized infrastructure which supports financial markets globally. So we work together to identify opportunities to enhance financial stability, potentially including proactive regulatory engagement. The second group that we participate in is, which is domestic, is the Canadian Financial Sector Resiliency Group, or CFRG. That group is a partnership between public and private enterprise led by the Bank of Canada that's designed to strengthen the financial sector's critical infrastructure against risks to business operations, including cyber. So its mandate is to enhance the operational resilience of Canada's critical financial sector. Scheduled meetings, when we meet, we come together to facilitate operational resilience initiatives. And it also, in times of crisis, will coordinate critical financial sector response to systemic level operational incidents. So both of these groups provide a significant opportunity for leaders to collaborate with peers in their industry as well as regulators on issues which can impact resilience. Outside of these groups, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the avenue of phone a friend. On that, I'd also share that Pete and I meet to seek insights on specific issues or challenges that we're facing, and not to diminish the value of the industry groups, but having one or two trusted peers to connect and share with can be very effective in helping you navigate uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And maybe to that, Adeline, from your perspective, being more at the industry level, seeing all the different players across the ecosystem, how do you foresee, what types of roles you see in terms of sharing and developing that consistency from a global scale?
Mario made some very good points there. But if I step back for a moment and we think about the global credit crisis some time ago now, there was, I think, more appetite for more global collaboration. And that meant better sort of alignment on certain standards, and then allowed for a little bit more consistent implementation with some customization depending on your jurisdiction. Over the last couple of years, we've noticed that there's been increased regulatory fragmentation. This creates complexity for financial institutions that operate more globally with different footprints and so forth. And so that also increased costs, and also creates inefficiencies for those organizations. We are fortunate, though, in Canada that we have a open and transparent regulatory regime where supervised financial institutions are able to connect with their regulators as well as the broader community. So OSFI has a digital innovation open door policy. So if you're an academic, if you're a fintech, if you're not necessarily regulated by OSFI, but would like to be one day, they have this policy where they encourage innovators to come and talk about things that they're seeing in the market and to connect in that dialogue. As well, CIRO, the securities self-regulating body, they also encourage the robust and industry level discussions. They have a crypto working group, and that's also meant to think about what's happening in the environment. How do we think about these evolving risks, and then how do we think about creating market conduct policies that help balance innovation and doing new things, but at the same time thinking about the risks to market integrity. So I think we are very fortunate in that we live in a regulatory environment where our regulators do want to see their regulated institutions as well as other players to be able to better understand what is evolving. So what ideas do you have? What innovations can you bring? And then how do we manage those risks together? So I think we are in this luxury position because of the nature of our regulatory environment.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good to see, some of that collaboration at the industry level, given the fragmentation. Pete, wanted to get your perspectives. Payments Canada is in a unique perspective of being at the central. So what perspective can you bring in terms of Payments Canada's role in facilitating some of that engagement?
Yeah, I would just first, Becky, just echo a couple of comments from Mario. Interesting, come early, come often. I really agree with that approach around early engagement with the regulators, and my team owns that relationship with the Bank of Canada, and I put a real focus on that work. So again, no surprise, aligned with Mario's approach. I'll try to answer this question around trust from a couple of different angles. If I think about, global footprint of regulators, partners, third parties, I think a key part of maintaining that trust and transparency is aligning to international standards, right? So be it the PFMIs that we all follow or ISO or NIST, I think aligning our activities, especially disciplines like risk management or cyber, or in the future AI to international standards, I think allows us to trust the process a bit more and to increase confidence in working with others. Payments Canada is in a unique opportunity, a unique spot to regularly conduct cross-jurisdictional information sharing with the likes of Pay.UK, of course, with our friends at TCH, the Fed, and others. In fact, tomorrow I'm honored to be hosting colleagues from the Bank of Kenya in Ottawa, where we're going to share best practices over a couple of days of talks. So awesome opportunities for Payments Canada to learn from others and to share our learnings. Payments Canada also facilitates what's known as the Payments Risk Group. This is a group that we lead that brings together risk shops from our membership and from the banks, large and small, to share and discuss things like emerging risk and shared operational risks. I think this kind of engagement and open and transparent sharing establishes trust, I think, with the membership. And I think it supports our collective efforts around proactive risk management. Last thing to mention, I'll just echo Mario's comments around CFRG. I think our central bank puts a lot of effort to ensure that CFRG does a good job of keeping industry focused on a couple of things, testing and response to incidents. I think the bank has shown that coordinated industry level engagement like CFRG is a really good tool at building trust and confidence. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Pete. Those are really good points. I wanted to double click into sort of the next topic of focus, which is really around, AI, automation, technology, transformation. I think, you mentioned something that was really interesting around aligning to best practices or standards to have a common footprint, right, in terms of what we're all trying to march towards. And I think today it's really important, given all the challenges we continue to face with managing that rapid technological change that has been mentioned already. Thinking about adoption of AI, thinking about the need to improve our cyber resilience, given, increased supply chain risks and evolving threat actors. So could you maybe speak a little bit about how you're looking at managing and developing trust around these types of changes and how you're navigating some of those transformational changes?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I think in terms of AI and tech like Gen AI, it's a bit of an evolving space for us. We're an FMI, right? I would say that we're obsessed with safety and soundness. So we're not typically early adopters of this kind of tech, which is not surprising. It's probably a good thing. This tech is also not generally regulated like others in our space. So our company is trying to build out tools to help manage it. So I think of the work that our team did last year, we developed an AI risk management approach to support AI use cases and solutions being deployed within the firm. Our approach is aligned with NIST. So again, benchmarking against international standards. And the foundation there is trying to ground what we're building to build trust with a given solution. So to make sure it makes sense for us at the right time. Let's say while we focus on understanding vendor controls and mitigating risk, we're also really focused on change management, right? So activities like user education, awareness, I think the principle of maintaining human oversight in decision making, just to repeat that phrase, maintaining human oversight, I think is an important piece of AI. And one final thought on AI is just that kind of common view that we all use. There's no framework yet developed around regulatory work on specific use cases for AI. There was, I think, some regs around E23 from OSFI applies to certain use cases, but there's kind of no standard approach. So where can we get some of those standards? I think the Canadian AI Safety Institute last year was launched, and I think some of their work is gaining traction on setting up best practices for responsible adoption and responsible use of AI. That's helpful for all of us, I think. And if I think about your last question around, building transparency and trust while navigating these changes, I'll talk about it from two angles real quick. One is internally. So I think it's really important to note that we've evolved our approach to board reporting recently. We're trying to include a lot more external analysis into our board reporting to acknowledge kind of current uncertainty. Of course, given recent events, we've also increased our focus on geopolitical risk. And probably most importantly, we've created a lot more room for dialogue with the board. So to have senior folks in the room, yes, getting risk insights, but also creating a lot more room for dialogue and understanding. And then from the external perspective, of course, is about dialogue and transparency in external forums. And I think also importantly, I think Mario mentioned bilateral engagement with our membership and our colleagues, right? Really important to help build trust that way. Maybe I'll stop there, Becky.
Really great. And I think the importance of that collaboration, given the fact that there is no clear line in terms of regulation today, is so important to lean on our friends, as Mario said, call a friend, see how folks are navigating through these challenges. It's new to everybody. So how we can lean on each other is definitely an important focus, and also not forgetting about the people aspect of it, right? And how we have to navigate through the changes for our people, both internally and externally, who are going to be ultimately using these tools. So really great points. Mario, do you have anything to add maybe from Interact's perspective and your focus when it comes to navigating some of these changes?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I think I'll focus a bit on cyber. So we're all aware of the rapid pace within which cyber criminals operate, and unfortunately, that rapid pace is fueled by the use of AI. So deploying AI in business processes, including security, to match that pace and scale of the cyber criminals is therefore paramount. This creates a much more complex environment for risk reporting because information becomes quickly outdated, particularly if you're providing it for a set meeting in the future at some point. Maintaining transparency and risk reporting amidst a volatile threat landscape is therefore a pretty dynamic challenge for all of us to face. Within every cyber risk management program, metrics are a critical element. Given the speed at which things evolve, you really need to focus on key risk indicators, or KRIs, that give that forward view, so that action can be taken, rather than KPIs, which are retrospective and focusing on measuring past performance and progress. So KRIs provide us with the ability to have the transparent discussions. Pete referred to them when he was responding about where risk is present, so that you can initiate quick remedial action. And a security team will be using that information in real time to prevent the imminent threats, as well as embedding KRIs and cyber reporting to senior management and the board to drive the discussion around the medium to longer term mitigation. So this is really where cyber and fraud differ from some other risks, and what makes them very ideal for AI. The other aspect that I'll touch on quickly is ecosystem collaboration, again, similar to what we discussed in the previous question. So like fraud, cybersecurity is not a competitive advantage. It's critically important for organizations, particularly in the financial ecosystem, but really in any industry, to work together to combat both. So membership in organizations like FSISAC, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and CFRG that we talked about before are really important. We need to come together to share intelligence and insights to protect not only Canada, but the global financial system. And taking that information that's shared and then using it within our own cybersecurity programs is key. The more that's shared and used in mitigation, the greater the value of that collaboration.
It's awesome to hear that on the cyber front, especially. Adeline, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Do. I think, we serve clients in financial services and beyond. And this is a really exciting but also scary time as these technologies are coming forward. And so there's not, this ability to just sit and wait and see. And so I think for our clients, we're helping them navigate through this, change. And so specifically on Gen AI, how to use that responsibly. So we've developed a responsible AI confidence index, which leans into some of the existing principles today that are set out in terms of voluntary codes of conduct. Canada has one. The OECD has some guidance around AI principles, and NIST as well. I know that was previously mentioned. And so what we've come up with is a number of principles that we use to assess models around accountability, bias and fairness, privacy, reliability, security, transparency, sustainability, and of course, compliance. And then depending on the use case, you may ratchet up on certain aspects. So for example, if it's a client-facing use case, you may want to make sure that the bias and fairness is ratcheted up as far as possible so that you've got as much insights into how the model's performing on that basis, but you may ratchet down on some other areas. In addition to developing sort of those concrete tools, we've also helped develop frameworks to help clients think through how do they enable and empower their teams to be able to start to use those technologies in a safe sandbox environment, because the best ideas for how use cases for generative AI or responsible AI in this instance come from the people who have the day-to-day work. They can see where those opportunities are. So it really is important to quickly put the power in their hands with, of course, some good guardrails and organizational risk appetite. We have a use case right now that we're working through, which is super exciting, which is helping combat money laundering and improving the ability for investigators to do more faster. And so in our model right now, what we're doing is we're helping investigators summarize the AML history of a particular client account. And so immediately at their fingertips, they've already got a lot of information there instead of having to spend the time doing the research. And then second, they're guided through, so a human at the center component where the investigator is the orchestrator. They have the subject matter expertise and they're guiding and asking questions of the model, certain insights to be able to then identify whether or not there are particular concerns or alerts that they should be aware of. And then finally, one of the biggest tasks, and I think that one of the biggest challenges, is getting this all documented so that you have the record keeping available to either save for future use and for future reliance when the next investigator comes to look at the history, or if it needs to be filed to a regulator, then you already have packaged some of that. Based on this entire use case, we're seeing that we're able to reduce the investigators' cycle time through a case file by many, many hours. And so I think it creates capacity, but it also creates the value that the human brings to the case review.
That is really exciting, and it gets me really excited to hear about some of those exciting use cases. And we know that, the bad actors are using technology to their advantage. So it's great to hear some of the good work being done in this space around how you're all taking action and thinking about how we can adopt AI while still maintaining that stewardship, safety, and soundness that's so important for our ecosystem, especially for operating some critical infrastructure. So I'm very excited to learn more about some of those trials. So when we think about the use of these emerging technologies like AI, a key dependency for its value proposition or that benefit realization comes down to the data, right? And I think what we're seeing is consumer expectations really shifting, and I feel rightfully so, given the number of breaches and increased awareness around how organizations are using data ethics, and privacy expectations have definitely shifted over the last number of years from sort of that passive acceptance. I might have never thought twice when I put in my date of birth and personal information into something, and now every time that it comes, I go, why do you need to know what year I was born, right? And we know that that trust also can erode extremely quickly when it comes to privacy breaches or those incidents. So how are your organizations adapting to these shifts in stakeholder expectations, and how are you maintaining that balance between proactive versus reactive transparency, especially when it comes to maintaining trust in times where there might be crisis, or when we're thinking about rolling out new technologies or new policies or frameworks? Mario, do you want to kick us off with this question?
Sure. Thanks, Becky. So I'd say at Interact, privacy is at the core of our corporate strategy, and also the personal data and privacy of Canadians is at the forefront of all of our products, whether that be defending and growing our current product suite, or investing in building in new offerings like fraud services that I talked about earlier. You mentioned this, Becky, the fastest way for any organization to lose trust and credibility is by failing to meet not only the regulatory requirements for data and privacy, but more importantly, consumer expectations. So there isn't any better way, I think, to mitigate this than adopting a privacy by design methodology. So that means embedding privacy practice in our product roadmap from the outset to ensure that the personal information of Canadians that's entrusted in our care remains secure. As we continue to innovate, solutions like Interact Verified demonstrate how we can combat hesitancy, somewhat like you talked about, Becky, and build upon the trust we've established with consumers. So it starts by designing and developing with privacy first. If you look at our Interact Verified services, so that enables Canadians who bank with a participating financial institution to digitally verify their data to securely access services offered by participating businesses and governments. And look back to 2024, over 1 million Canadians completed digital onboarding and registration with the CRA via the Interact signed-in service. So we know that moving money and data safely and securely is central to Canadians' everyday lives. And we also know that people expect organizations to be accountable for how their personal data is handled. Putting privacy and security first is more important than ever, as it affects everything that we do. And these digital services often require customers to leverage their online banking login credentials to access a service, which can raise uncertainty about the security of their data. One of our recent surveys, we surveyed more than 1,500 Canadians, found 61% trust that their online banking is secure. However, confidence starts to wane when it comes to using their online banking credentials to access other digital financial tools, with 45% expressing security concerns when they do that. So that the hesitancy for Canadians to feel as comfortable using their personal data to access services outside of online banking highlights the role that the entire Canadian ecosystem needs to play in bolstering Canadians' confidence in the digital economy. And I think important to note is that this is never a one and done. Personal information, you said it, Becky, personal information stolen and exploited every single day, all day. So we need to continually reinforce the security of that information. I do want to spend a minute discussing crisis or incident response. So while we always build in a way that ensures data is protected, we also need to be prepared in the event that there's a failure in the protections that are in place. So this means that we approach a crisis or an incident with the same level of trust and transparency as we do for all of our other operations. We, like many, have a crisis management team that includes our executives, our comms, our business continuity experts, and there's a comprehensive process that outlines the types of crises, the triggers, the assessments, required communications, both internal and external, and then holistically manages these situations. Think about fraud mitigations baked into our daily workflows. We have 24/7 fraud teams constantly monitoring for new trends and responding in real time. And when a more significant fraud incident happens, we activate a cross-functional response plan that includes a number of different areas to coordinate both internally and externally. And by employing a proactive approach, the crisis management team manages the impact on brand and reputation while ensuring business continuity, which is key. For all other incidents, many like us will have established business as usual incident management processes in place. So operational and technical teams excel really managing these situations, and then escalating to a crisis management team when necessary. So what's important is ensuring that the teams that manage an incident or a crisis have well-defined processes, especially for communications. Focus on facts and being timely are both critical. So back to building trust and maintaining trust. It's definitely a delicate balance and really depends on the facts and the circumstances of each situation. So spending the time to assess impact is often the best input into the decisions around those communications to really maintain the trust in that time.
I really like the point that it's a life cycle approach, right? It's not a one and done, and we have to
Absolutely.
learn. It's iterative, right? So every time we go through, and like, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so when that does happen, how are we actually learning from some of those experiences and then building more resilience into the existing processes, I think is a really important takeaway. Pete, do you have anything to add from Payments Canada's perspective in terms of how we're approaching maintaining that trust, especially when it comes to kind of managing consumer expectations and the data side of things?
Yeah, just touch quickly. Mario, as usual, made a really good point around crisis management. So like Interact, Payments Canada is tied into a similar process that provides venues for information sharing and timely comms. So being an FMI, that's a good thing, right? From my perspective, as an operator of rails, if I think about the data, it's critical we understand kind of where our data resides, right? How it's handled, how it's protected. And this not only involves my firm, because there's a whole chain there, but also involves service providers from a third-party perspective. And thinking from a vendor perspective and the need to build trust, right? Our central theme today, our firm underwent a proactive assessment of OSFI B10 with the idea of providing our membership with assurances that we have robust systems in place. So a lot of work done being proactive instead of reactive, right? If I think a bit about being a bit more macro, moving beyond my roles in FMI, if I just think about ethical data use and data, a few things come to mind where a company might share an approach. I think about firms that can apply ethical data principles, right? This can involve basics like ensuring that data is collected only when necessary, data retention is minimized or only retained when necessary, and sensitive data is anonymized where possible, right? I think companies could or maybe should implement data steward roles to ensure that data is treated responsibly, right? We're looking for treatment of data in ways that is fair, transparent, and where possible, equitable. Right. If I bring it back to AI a little bit and algorithms, right? Firms should try to build models that prioritize, where possible, customer welfare, customer fairness. And I'm thinking about AI models that are not only efficient, but ethical, right? So maybe in summary around the data piece, as expectations evolve around ethics and transparency, firms might need to go beyond the basics and embed these practices in the everyday business. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Pete. And I think you said it too, that the balance between proactive and reactive, being proactive in terms of being able to demonstrate to stakeholders how we're approaching it, and also where some of the opportunities are for improvement through some of those assessments is critical, so that we can share, here's how we're prioritizing some of those areas and building some of that trust as well. So really good points there. Adeline, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I would just lean in a little bit on the crisis management piece, because I think there's a lot of good work that you can do in advance to avoid being in a crisis situation. But sometimes crisis happens to you, and so that you need to be prepared. And I think both Mario and Peter talked about the robust programs that they have in place for crisis management. As a crisis advisor, I would say that, the number one thing too, beyond having all of those playbooks and, the sort of the people who need to be involved in the room, is that credibility is established at the beginning of the crisis. And so the early minutes and hours matter. And so getting that program stood up as quickly as possible, being really clear on who's supposed to be in the room, what the decision-making rights are, and that this team has practiced. I think it's really important to recognize that crisis management is a team sport, and you can bring in all of the superstar players to the table, and they are going to do their best. But when you look at a crisis, it is run horizontally. And the number one thing that we see when people are working through a crisis that disrupts your ability to respond is when people get in the way of others. And so it's really important to not only be really clear about those roles and responsibilities, but then put them into practice so that we also trust each other and so that we can stay focused on our part in the resolution for a crisis.
That's a good point in terms of knowing what your role is when actually, you know, the when happens, how we get clarity and go through those processes very efficiently, I'd say. So I know we're coming up on time. I could speak to all three of you for much longer, but we are time capped today. So maybe we'll wrap up with just a summarizing thought from each of you in terms of what is one distinct action or change that you may have led or seen that has tangibly improved regulator, board, or employee trust that listeners may be able to take away and apply to their organization. Pete, do you want to kick us off with your first takeaway for the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I think I mentioned off the top that I've been here at Payments Canada for 7 years now. And our focus over that time, aside from building frameworks and tools, has been risk culture. And I know it sounds corny, but I say it all the time. But for us, it's all about making risk-informed decisions, right? We're focused on being proactive. We're focused on being collaborative. We like to bring a business lens and try to add value with the first line. So we're trying to really build that culture of collaboration and trust, where which helps both information sharing, but also folks seeking a second opinion, right? So building bridges, working horizontally across the firm, as Adeline mentioned, I think can help us cut to the chase. Maybe more importantly, help us provide solutions with greater ease and greater speed. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Pete. Mario?
Yeah, so I second risk culture for sure. I'm going to respond in the context of our board, but this can actually be effective for any stakeholder. So as someone who engages with our board each quarter and presents on many different topics, what I found to be very important and effective in improving trust and maintaining it is showing your work. So we all know that the board's role is that of oversight of strategy, operations, and performance. But board members aren't working in the organization day to day. So they have management to run the business in line with the strategic direction that they've set. That entails an immense amount of trust. And the best approach to build and maintain that trust is for management to provide the board with the right amount of information at the right time. So whether it's information for discussion or something that you're seeking the board's approval for, you really do need to provide evidence that you've done the analysis, the due diligence, and have followed the organization's internal guidance and processes. So this not only gives the board the necessary information that they need to fulfill their duties, but it provides them the confidence that management's acting in the best interest of the organization and their vision and strategy. The board's reliance on management, it is a delicate balance between delegation and oversight. And I think showing the work, particularly when you're asking for the board's approval, becomes critically important as that establishes trust by the board and management. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks, Mario. And last but not least, Adeline, with final closing thoughts.
I would say, and above and beyond what both Pete and Mario have eloquently said, it's important to have advanced planning for disruptions, the things that you can't control. We know that we live in a world where even the most robust plans can go awry when an external factor comes into play. So I would say being prepared increases confidence of the organization and of your stakeholders. It also allows you to be transparent, and that increases trust. There's a famous business quote that I would leave us with, which is, good luck is when opportunity meets preparation, while bad luck is when lack of preparation meets reality.
Great final quote. Really like that. Thank you so much to each one of you for taking the time to share your thoughts and your expertise today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. And thank you to all of our listeners who will be tuning in. Hopefully we can continue this discussion into 2026. I'm sure there will be much more uncertainty to navigate throughout 2025 into 2026. So thank you again, and have a great day.